So the first panel today will be devoted to understanding the current trend and the current situation and the current concern or competitive concern in the sector. So there will be 7 speakers, 3 representatives of regulators. So Giulio Federico will from the chief economist team at the DG Comp, and will start to present, and then it will be followed by Marc Fourer, who is president of the Swiss Communication Commission and host of this meeting, and we'll discuss the Orange case, I guess. And Johannes Gungel from the Austrian Regulatory Authority will discuss the consequence of the merger in Austria. And then we'll have 4 speakers representing stakeholders. Stephen Tass, who will present the ethno positions, followed by Erzsébet Fittori, who will present the hectare positions. So some ping pong. And then we'll have Jacques Bonifay will present the views of the full MVNOs. And Laszlo Toth, with senior director at the GSM Association, will present the view of the mobile industry, I would say more than mobile operator. So we have a last speaker, which with Matthias Kurz, excuse me, who will intervene in the next 2 panels, but not formally in this panel, but may intervene in the question and answer session. And we will talk about the cable industry, or represent the cable industry. That's in the floor. Okay, Julio, you have 15 minutes.
Great, thank you very much. I hope the mic works. So I'm from DG Competition. I'm actually from the Chief Economist team, so I'll give you a presentation of 2 recent cases, the Irish and German one, mainly from an economic perspective. My colleague Sophie Moonen from DG Comp is also in the audience, and if questions on broader non-economic issues arise, I'm sure she can come to my rescue. So it's a pleasure to be here. The usual disclaimer applies that my views are personal. I don't represent those of the Commission. And also thanks to Bruno for the excellent introduction. I think it's very useful for me as an economist to go after the Toulouse experts. And indeed, many of the issues that we've tackled in the recent cases in this industry are fundamental issues of oligopoly theory and of static versus dynamic effects, which Bruno has already introduced. So everybody in this audience will know that the Commission has looked at a number of mobile mergers in the past few years. Today I'm going to talk in particular about the ones that were cleared in 2014 after phase 2 investigations. These are the Irish and the German case. Some of you, well, the Irish decision is public, so some of you may have looked at that. It's a very detailed, in-depth investigation into that particular transaction. The German one is similarly detailed. So I think these are good case studies of the work that the European Commission has been doing in this sector. I won't talk about the most recent Austrian merger. Was cleared in 2012, but the colleague from RTR will mention that, and I think it's particularly important to understand the ex-post evidence on the effects of that merger in the market. So I personally look forward to that presentation. And also, as Bruno has mentioned, these are all cases that have been assessed under the new test in the 204 merger regulation, so the significant impediment to effective competition. Now this case has created a clear market leader or dominant firm, but that led in the Commission assessment to the risk of unilateral effects, so loss of competition between emerging parties, which may also lead non-merging parties to react by increasing prices. I'll come to that, and therefore impede effective competition. The main concerns were of unilateral nature, not of coordinated nature, but the type of remedies that were eventually accepted also address some of the issues of coordination, in particular in the wholesale market. So I guess we can discuss that later, but the main framework has been one of unilateral effects. So just a reminder on the Irish merger. This merger brought together Hutchinson 3G, Ireland, and O2. Hutchinson was the most recent entrant in Ireland at the time, and sort of an important challenger in the market, and had been growing quite fast in the recent past, was merging with one of the main incumbents in the market. In fact, indeed acquiring O2 as one of the main incumbents. So the combined position of the parties was roughly of the size of the market leader Vodafone, so 40% roughly of subscribers, and then a third player, Aircom, remains in the market with a smaller position. Now, key issues of this particular market, which I think are worth stressing and coming to the analysis, is that network sharing had already been achieved by the operators and was being sort of rolled out, either active network sharing or passive network sharing, involving O2 and Aircom on one side and Vodafone and Three on the other side. The other issue, which is broader and applies to most of these markets, again, this has been mentioned, is that these are markets with an oligopoly structure as a fundamental issue, so where new entry, absent remedies, is difficult or unlikely. There are large fixed costs. There are also switching costs for customers. It's hard as a new entrant to build in a customer base. So in that sense, some of the issues that in other cases arise on other dynamics, in the sense that new players may come into the market relevant, I think are less severe in the mobile sector, absent commitments. So indeed, the entry of new MNOs, in particular in Ireland, which wasn't a particularly profitable market, was something that was seen as very unlikely. Also, MVNO entry or MVNO presence in Ireland was not significant at the time of the merger assessment. So these are, in that sense, standard. Again, we mentioned oligopoly markets with well-defined market structure, pre-merger and post-merger. The parties in this case made a number of claims in order to argue that the merger would not lead to anti-competitive effects. One was a sort of standard assessment of closeness or lack of closeness, mainly an argument that O2 and Three were not particularly close competitors because they had different brand perceptions and they targeted different customer groups, and Three also had a sort of perceived lower network quality. There was also an attempt at making efficiency claims. I'll come to that in more detail. I guess the main efficiency claim was one based on cash flow constraints faced by Hutchinson pre-merger, which would have been limited, which would have been mitigated by the synergies, the fixed cost savings brought about by the merger, which in turn would have led Hutchinson to invest more. So we're talking here about the dynamic effect of the type that Bruno has described, not sort of the plain vanilla effect that Bruno mentioned based on the sort of Aguillon et al. Literature, so on the sort of growth literature. This was more based on an argument on cash flow and financial constraints. And finally, there was also a counterfactual argument, if you wish, that basically in part because of these cash flow issues on Hutchinson, and in part because of O2's strategic focus, absent the merger, both parties would not have been particularly aggressive or credible competitors in terms of new investment and rollout of LT in particular. The kind of analysis that was done, as I mentioned earlier, is a standard oligopoly analysis, in particular based on a number of observations. One, that Hutchinson had been an aggressive, disruptive force in the market before the merger, and that would have changed post-merger by virtue of the fact that it would have become a much larger incumbent in the marketplace. Two, an assessment that the counterfactual argument put forward by the parties were not convincing. In particular, Hutchinson was growing, had been growing, and the Commission didn't think that the evidence was sufficient to suggest that that would have changed significantly absent the merger. And O2 as well, absent the merger, would have, based on a new spectrum acquired in the latest auction, would have also rolled out LTE to a sufficient extent. And as I mentioned, in a standard oligopoly assessment, the natural prediction is that if the merging parties compete less and increase prices, non-merging parties will react to that by increasing their volumes, but that won't be sufficient to offset the initial price effect. Indeed, non-merging parties, even under no collusive models, would also increase prices and contribute to a general increase in prices. So the standard oligopoly assessment here effectively is based on the fact that all industry players would react to the reduction in competition and increase prices post-merger. And finally, there was an additional issue in this case, which was specific to this case, that because of network sharing arrangements, ERCOM would have been a risk of foreclosure of ERCOM. Again, this is the foreclosure arguments that Bruno also mentioned post-merger by virtue of a degradation of the network sharing agreement. So the type of evidence that was used beyond the sort of qualitative evidence of internal document review on the type of effects expected by the parties from the transaction, and also on the perception of each other's competitive pressure before the transaction, in terms of the economic analysis, which is the one that, as I said, I'm mostly suited to speak about, was a twofold analysis. One was a standard merger simulation analysis based on evidence on diversion between parties, so how customers in the past had shifted between merging parties and other competitors. This was based on portability data, which is common in this industry. And that evidence is also complemented with evidence on margins, on incremental margins and gross margins. That is relevant in this type of assessment. And that's a standard simulation approach, which is standard in products, in differentiated products, markets, and as Bruno also said, leads to a prediction of price effects absent efficiency claims. In this case, we also attempted for the first time in this industry a larger scale merger simulation exercise based on tariff data, trying basically to predict closeness between parties based on observed tariff and volume measures. This is quite a complex exercise in the industry because of the complexity of the tariff structure. So eventually we couldn't reach a sufficiently reliable assessment of the merger based on this evidence. However, as I mentioned in the German case, this was implemented more effectively and therefore complemented the evidence from the more simpler merger simulation. So this you'll see in the public decision, but the kind of price effects that this analysis suggests are in the order of 5 to 8% for the merging parties in the postpaid segment in particular, which was the segment where they were most successful. And then if you look across the entire segment, including non-merging parties, then you get to price effects in the range of 4 to 6%. So these are not huge price effects, but it's the ones that typically authorities would worry about in the context of a horizontal merger, absent credible and verifiable efficiency claims. So I think the key countervailing issues mentioned by the parties in this case were twofold. One was the fact that this type of static models are not suitable for predicting the effects of the merger, and two, and is a related point, an efficiency claim. The first point is one that, for example, a model with quality measures and investment measures may deliver a different outcome and different prediction of consumer harm than a simpler static model with no investment or quality issues. Now, this was addressed in detail in this case. So you'll see it in the decision. Commission found that ultimately, even a model with quality and investment considerations, absent efficiency claims, wasn't sufficient to offset the concern that the merger would lead to a reduction in competition. And even though it's true, I think Bruno is right to say that there's a literature that suggests that the relationship between competition and an investment may be ambiguous. The literature is not very suitable to understand how changes in market structure and investment should be predicted. And I'm personally skeptical. I think that most economic models would suggest that if investment is a competition variable and a market structure changes, then that competition variable will behave in a similar way as other variables like price, and in particular, the incentives to invest in order to steal business from customers, from rivals, will diminish in a more concentrated market structure. And given we mentioned Nobel Prize winners, Kenneth Arrow is a sort of Nobel Prize winner that is linked to that idea that monopoly, players with market power will invest less because they have less to steal from rivals. And that is quite a strong intuition that the empirical literature and the theoretical literature also supports. Just let me move on to the efficiency claim, just in the interest of time. And one of the efficiency claims was, as I mentioned, related to the first point here. The merger would lead to more investment. Here it was based on the notion that cash flow constraints will be reduced post-merger. And therefore Hutchinson, because of the higher cash flow, not due to a market power effect, due to a fixed cost saving effect, so similar in terms of ultimate impact on profits, but different in terms of its origin, would actually therefore invest more. Now, the problem with that particular argument is that if the acquiring firm is making that argument, and therefore the acquiring firm is actually investing a lot in buying a rival, it's not clear why, therefore, it is cash flow constrained. So whilst the argument may work better if the acquired firm is cash flow constrained, it's less credible and effective if the acquiring firm makes the claim that's cash flow constrained. And in particular, it's not clear why the mother company in this particular case would have allowed these higher cash flows to be retained in Ireland and not redistribute them within the group if indeed it felt that it was cash flow constrained and therefore wanted to limit the cash available to its subsidiaries. Moreover, a general claim that investment will increase post-merger still needs to meet the test in the horizontal merger guidelines on the criteria that needs to be fulfilled, and therefore, in particular, the benefit to consumer of that higher investment needs to be still quantified. It's not sufficient to say we'll invest more in general. You still need to show how consumers will benefit and how that will trade off with the consumer harm that's predicted by the standard oligopoly model. Let me wrap up quickly. I haven't been able to discuss Germany with you, just because of the interest of time. I understand I should wrap up. Let me just say two things on Germany. One, that the analysis, the horizontal analysis is similar in some ways, though it's more based on the fact that Telefonica and E-Plus, the merging parties in that case, were particularly close competitors, in particular for prepay or low-end postpay. So in that sense, there's more of a closeness assessment in their particular case. As I mentioned earlier, the quantitative analysis in that particular case is more developed. There's two tools which are complementary and get to a similar conclusion. And three, the efficiency claims in that case were more concrete, if I may say, than the Irish case. So there was an attempt to really quantify the effects of higher investment, the ones I just mentioned here. But ultimately, the main issue there was one of merger specificity. Could the parties achieve the same network benefits with network sharing? The Commission felt, yes, that was the case, and therefore most of those efficiency claims were not merger specific. Now, some of you may be interested in remedies. I think I can park that for the discussion in case anybody has questions on that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so the next speaker will be Marc Fuhrer, who will discuss the Swiss Orange case. Good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first, of course, I would like to welcome you here, because as you heard, I'm the host, being Swiss and being in charge of the National Regulatory Authority, ComCom, which has the office just over the river here. I hope you enjoy Bern, and I thank you very much for your interest to come here to our town. Now, I would like to talk a bit from a practical view this topic of merger, and usually one talks about the mergers which happened. Now I talk you about a non-merger, a merger which I would say from our point of view unfortunately did not happen. That was 4 years ago. It was the merger between Sunrise, who is a company who has all the products, mobile, fixed network, IP, and so on, and Orange, which belonged at the time to France Telecom, which was not having fixed network. Now, for that, and I think it's quite interesting to see, because at the end, the ComCom, the telecom regulator, was for it. The competition authority was against it, and it needs obviously the green light from both of it. So it did not happen. And a few years later, we can see what are the consequences, or what were the results. Did the results the Competition Commission hoped happened, or did they not happen? Now, to see it, I can show you the situation of the Swiss market as it was at the time. By the way, it's still the same. That was the mobile market shares. You can see Swisscom is clearly in the lead and was clearly in the lead. Then Sunrise, 21% of the market shares, and Orange with 17%. With the broadband, very similar. Sunrise, much less than Swisscom. And of course, what is important, Cablecom, and I'll talk about that, and other CATVs are very strong and have been increasingly strong. Cablecom is, I would say, the biggest competitor against Swisscom nowadays, but of course has no mobile operator, but they have an MVNO with Orange, had at the time of the non-merger and still have. So basically one of the biggest challenge, or the biggest challenger to Swisscom, is Cablecom and the other cable operator. We have 90% of the Swiss households have CATV, have cable operators. So it's a very similar situation as is, for example, in Belgium or in Holland, which is an important thing for high broadband development in Switzerland. So that was the situation, and then you know, that's what I just talked. We have one big and two small mobile operators. Swisscom is the innovation leader in Switzerland, and Orange and Sunrise, of course, suffered that they had you know, a lower market shares. They are too small, basically, for a fierce competition were, and but of course they still have to have high investments, because the client doesn't care how much market share you have. He wants to have a coverage all over Switzerland. So when you go skiing at these beautiful conditions, you also want, as an Orange or Sunrise client, also have the network. And they put a lot, they did put a lot of money into the network, into the investment, and they're still doing so. So that is the handicaps of the Swisscom competitors were. Orange had no fixed network, but still high investments in the mobile network, low economies of scale, and Sunrise a bit the same. They have, of course, a fixed network, but also high investment and a low economies of scale. Cablecom have higher economies of scale, but no mobile network. They have an MVNO though. So the logical thing was either acquisition of Sunrise by Orange France Telecom, or a merger of Orange Switzerland and Sunrise. And so France Telecom, who owned at the time Orange, said, okay, we are going for it. And they had an agreement with Sunrise to take over, to buy Sunrise. And this would have been New Orange, which would have immediately, with the clients together, 38% of the market. And that was, of course, the idea, to have a stronger market player against Swisscom in the Swiss market. So the new Orange would have been certainly the number 2 and the big challenger for Swisscom. So that was the idea. And of course, thinking that with the innovation center, with all the know-how France Telecom have and had at the time, they could increase their market shares much over 38%. So the idea was to give the sleeping Swiss telecom market, which it was, and actually unfortunately still is, it would have given a necessary injection, a necessary impulse, and of course a new dynamism, because it was said quite clearly by Professor Julien, it's not only about competition, it's about the dynamism of a market, and I think that was the idea behind it. So what were the arguments for the merger? And that was put forward obviously by Orange. New Orange would have had a better cost structure because of the economies of scale, that is clear. They would have a better customer base. Then I think a very important point is the global market player Orange, with all their research and development know-how from in Paris, could have given new products, new ideas, innovative things to the new Orange, which of course a small company, for example, difficult, who is not linked to a big player like Vodafone or Telefonica or so on, cannot have. They can't afford such a research and development center. So that would have been a very, very, very important thing. So we would have had first in the mobile market, okay, only two strong integrated two strong players, Swisscom and New Orange, but there would have been, as an integrated telecom player, there would have been the third one, CATV, because that's CATV operators, mainly UPC Cablecom, which has an MVNO, and so that would have been the possibility to become that UPC Cablecom would have become also a quadruple player, and we would have had with a merger 3 equally strong integrated provider, and that could boost competition in Switzerland. That was the arguments the ComCom, the Federal Communication Commission, made, saying and very clearly saying yes to this merger. The cons of the merger, and that was the position of the Competition Commission, says, it's a little milk girl addition is, well, you have 3 mobile players, then you have only 2, so that brings less competition in market, that brings a duopoly, which is not good for the market. So they were the Competition Commission, and we believe that was the mistake, focused very much on the mobile market and not on the whole telecom market as it is. So they didn't take really the CATV competitors like UPC Cablecom into consideration. And of course, and there they were right, they said that we will only have 2 players and it's unlikely that the third one would enter the market. Now, we don't know. We had then the auction, and there indeed there was no other player, no fourth player. But of course, every other player said, well, 3 are enough, we're not going as a fourth one. If there would have been only 2 players, which would have been after the merger the case, it's possible that in an auction a third one would have said, well, now it's interesting for us. But anyway, so that were the arguments of the Competition Commission, and there was a fear of a collective market dominance. I mean, it's clear those are also good arguments against the merger. That is clear. That I have to say. It depends how you see it. Now, as I said, the merger did not happen. The situation is as it was before. The competition situation is blocked. I could bring the picture I started with, the presentation. It's still the same situation, a very dominant Swisscom which dominates the broadband market and certainly dominates the mobile market. Two smaller players, one does not, Orange does not belong to France Telecom anymore, and it's now Monsieur Niel who bought it. That is, of course, a certain hope. He is the owner of Free in France. That gives a certain push, but it doesn't change the fact that it has only 17 or 18% market shares. And Sunrise, who do, like Orange, a very good job in Swiss market, have a bit over 20%. So we have this blocked situation, and UPC Cablecom is certainly the biggest competitor, but they should do something out of the MVNO. So that is a comfortable situation for the Swisscom as the incumbent and the main player. So we believe it was a missed opportunity for establishing a strong third competitor in the Swiss market besides Swisscom and UPC Cablecom. And what is, of course, very important is competition is not just about numbers, but it's about individual power of the player. It is about the dynamism, the players can bring to the market. And we believe that this would have been the case with a firm which had all the backup of the research, of the development, for example, of a firm like France Telecom, and this opportunity was missed. Whether it will come again, I don't know, because it's difficult for an authority, once they decide this way, to decide 5 or 6 or 7 years later the other way around. And it's tough. It will be tough to change this situation. So unfortunately, in our market, the situation stays most probably quite blocked. We still have investments in the market. That is to say, that's clear. But it's less due to fierce competition. It's more through the fact that the value of the enterprise, like a Sunrise, like an Orange, goes up if there is a high investment in the networks and so on. So anyway, that's the presentation of a case, of a negative case. You will hear presentations of positive cases, but I think for the discussion, it's also quite useful to learn from these non-mergers or negative cases, if you want to say so. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the instructive views. So the next speaker will be Johannes Gungel, who will talk about the merger who took place and what followed.
Okay, good afternoon. To respond a little bit on Mark, whether merger, if they don't go through, good or positive or negative. Well, I present an example. I don't know whether it's positive or negative. I will just present facts and observations, and I will keep the opinions for the discussion later on. First of all, thank you, Fatima, for inviting me to this panel. Obviously, I have a story to tell. Let's see. As you are aware, we have seen a merger recently, about 2 years ago. There was a merger in the mobile market between number 4 Hutchison, who acquired number 3 Orange. And this was 2 years ago. And there have been, or since then, remedies are in place. This merger went through after an in-depth analysis by the EU Commission. The merger was a little bit more complex because, in fact, there were 2 separate deals. But for this analysis, only the case Hutchison and Orange is interesting. Hutchison, to go through with the merger, offered remedies. They have offered to grant up to 16 MVNOs access to their network over the next 10 years. And there were minor obligations on frequency as well. And well, the merger was effective in January 2013. And RTR and the Competition Commission Authority in Austria had concerns about what will happen on the Austrian mobile market. And because of these concerns, we have developed a monitoring system, an index, and here we can present the results of the index. It starts in the year 2011, and the vertical line marks the effectiveness of the merger. We have formed 4 user groups: a low user, a medium user, a high user, and a power user. And we have taken the cheapest tariffs for each user group and weighted according to the market shares and put them into the index. What you can see is that we have seen significant rise of prices since the merger for new customers. This reflects only new customers, not, and we have seen price increases for this group as well. This includes not if operators have increased prices for existing or running contracts. What from my perspective was the largest concern, the competition dynamic that took place after the merger. We are not very much concerned about the absolute price level. As you can see, end of 2014, we are more or less from the total index on the same level as at in the beginning of 2011. So the price level for the total index did not increase very much. But for the low user group, there was a significant price rise that started already a little bit before the merger. And after the merger, it was even worse. And we have seen up to 40% price increases for that user group. Here are the exact numbers. The timing of the merger is marked red. You can see for all user groups, the starting point in January 2013 and the end point in December 14. And you can see for the low user group more than 40% price increase, medium user and high user round about 20%. And even for the power user, those who pay the highest invoice, the highest monthly invoice, we have seen price increases. So what are the observations now after 2 years? We have seen price rises across all user groups for new customers. The price rises were of the same nature for all tariffs. The monthly tariffs were increased substantially partly, but they included more minutes, SMS and data volumes. But to give you an example, most of the tariffs included in 2013 at least 1,000 minutes, 1,000 SMS and 1,000 megabyte. The average user in Austria cannot use 1,000 minutes, 1,000 SMS and 1,000 megabyte. And sometimes the volumes were doubled, but no average user could ever use that. So effectively he paid more for the same usage without being in the position to use the additional volumes, minutes and SMS. What was new afterwards, after the merger, that tariffs were introduced with unlimited minutes and SMS. The anchor for all the tariffs is now the data volume. The data volumes determines the pricing of the monthly fee. Coming back to Mark again, when I look at the telecom markets, I don't see mobile operators, I don't see fixed line operators anymore. I see ISPs granting access for customers. And I think this could maybe one consideration for further merger cases, how broad or narrow to view the telecom market. What was very interesting after the merger as well, that the one-time activation fee, if you sign up a contract, you have to pay an activation fee. This fee was increased by, at all operators, at approximately 40%. The issue with this is that obviously operators erected barriers to switch for customers. In addition to this higher activation fee, subsidies for handset were partly dramatically reduced. So if you want to switch from one operator to another, you have to face substantial one-off costs. Looking at the out-of-bundle cost and the yearly service charge, this remained unchanged. And as I said before, we have seen also increases for existing customers. This was a major concern for the public in the last 2 years, because every 1 or 2 months, one of the operators increased the tariffs for existing customer. In Austria, if you have a running contract and your operator increases the price, you have, as a customer, extraordinary cost-free termination right. Despite this termination right, all operators increased prices. But things have changed recently. End of 2014 and beginning of 2015, based upon the merger remedies, at least 2 MVNOs entered the market. We have seen a kind of soft launch in December of UPC, who was the upfront buyer in the merger case. So the upfront buyer entered the market 2 years after the merger. And what we have seen, that the price increases have stopped now, at least for the time being. And what is more remarkable, one operator in the no-frill segment or the discount segment has already responded to the market entry and the very aggressive pricing of an MVNO. We have seen beginning of January the market entry of an MVNO backed by one of the biggest retail chains in Germany, known for their low prices, and they have entered the mobile market with a very aggressive pricing. And one competitor responded already to this very aggressive pricing and reduced the pricing as well. As I said, 2 MVNOs have already launched their service, and in the course of this year, we expect 2 additional MVNOs. What is interesting behind that we have seen a kind of competition on wholesale level for MVNOs. As I said, only Hutchison had remedies in place, so they were obliged to grant access to their network. The prices for the wholesale prices were fixed during the merger case, and 2 out of the 4 MVNOs did not launch their service on the Hutchison network, but on T-Mobile's network. So we see kind of competition between the networks on wholesale level. Maybe this is also impacted by major problems of Hutchison to consolidate the 2 networks, the 2 merging networks. Maybe what for the reasons of fairness, I have to say, and I'm going back to the index. As you might be aware, end of 2013, we have seen a very interesting multi-band frequency auction, with, from an absolute perspective, have shown quite high prices. And the Austrian discussion is always circulating around the fact whether the price rises come from the merger, the reduction from 4 to 3, or from the expensive multi-band auction. We as the regulator have a very clear view on that. Number one, from economic theory, and I'm not a scientist, but a man of practice, I also would say there is limited relation between multi-band auction and the price increases, because they started already before the auction, and the substantial price increases were already planned by operators before the auction. So there might be a connection, but we cannot single out the merger or the multi-band auction as the root cause for the price rises. So these are the observations from the Austrian market. Maybe a last word in terms of investment. The question is always, how does a merger or a consolidation or a higher competition or higher level of competition affect the level of investment? In Austria, we cannot single that out, because in 2013 we had, of course, a very high level of investment because of the multi-band auction, and now we have the coverage obligation for LTE, so we cannot separate the cause and the consequences. Having said that, I'm looking forward to your questions and discussions about the Austrian case. Thank you.
So thank you. So after this very interesting experience, floor is for the stakeholders. So you are free to either give your views on the current trend, react to what has been said before, and of course make it short, so that people can intervene also from the room. Okay, so the first speaker will be Stephen for Ethno.
Okay, first of all, thank you to Berec for inviting us here in this workshop on an interesting topic. I'm personally already involved in regulatory discussions for more than 10 years, mainly at the Belgium level. And what I will always appreciate is the good dialogue with the regulators. I must say, often I disagree with the views of the regulators, but I think everything starts with a good dialogue, so that we very much understand the issue which is at hand, and that we can take the right decisions. And that's why I think the initiative of today is very much appreciated, I think, by everybody involved in this sector. I think 2015 will be a very important year. I think the Commission has important plans in order to have a discussion on the review of the regulatory framework. Bruno, you said that we should be careful when we change the framework. I think we need to do wise things, but I think the framework is already in Europe a little bit old, and the market has evolved quite a lot over the past 10 to 20 years, and I think there's definitely need for reforms. And it's also good to see that BEREC wants to take a very active, play an active role in this discussion. I think it's important also not just to focus on a couple of topics, but to have a sufficiently broad discussion on all the reforms that are needed. So before I talk about a subject of today, so market structure, I would like to make a couple of general points. And I think it's very important that we all together articulate a very ambitious common goal for this digital industry in Europe. I think we sometimes are even not ambitious enough. I think we all know that having the best networks is the best guarantee for having the best digital industry in Europe and having the best digital society. Sometimes in Europe we just try to think on how can we do things a little bit better. I think digital economy is such an important thing for the competitiveness of Europe that we really should have the ambition to have the best digital economy of the world and therefore also the best digital networks. And this is about investment. So I think the core the discussion that we should have is on how can we stimulate investments in networks in Europe. And the rules that we established 10 to 20 years ago had another objective. They had the objective, we had monopolies and we wanted to create a dynamic market. That was the starting point of 10 to 20 years ago. I think now we have evolved quite a lot, and so we should have a really fresh thinking on what's exactly required for our industry. Now, on concentrated markets, I prefer that term more than oligopolies. Yes, there is a clear trend in Europe. Well, a lot of cases has already been mentioned, and I think this trend will continue. We really think this is a positive trend. Look also at the rest of the world. If you compare our industry with regions in the rest of the world, we have simply a more fragmented market. So it's logic that there is a trend for more consolidation and for more concentration. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that we are playing in a global economy. The digital economy is a global economy, so we must make sure that the European players can play at the European level and that we have strong players. Now, what are the drivers? I think the drivers have already been mentioned by the other speakers. Of course, it's a very capital intensive industry, so you need a certain scale. More competition is not always better, as you said, Bruno, so that's important. There's also convergence. The boundaries of our industries are no longer the boundaries of 10 to 20 years ago, so we need players who can play this game at a global level. So we need to really to stimulate a certain level of concentration in this industry. So I think we should certainly not fear concentrated markets. We should rather welcome them, I think. We should think on how we can stimulate investment, also stimulate the competitive rally between players. So stimulate through investments, stimulate the competitive rally between players in a more concentrated manner. I think that will really bring upside for consumers, upside for the Euro economy. And that also requires that we look at, when we will discuss mergers, and has already been mentioned by the other speakers, look at it in a very dynamic way, not in a static way. If you look things in a too static way, then you will then you basically will block things which are very natural and very important for our industry. And if you look at the Swiss example, I think that's a very good example where I think we probably should have let the market do things a little bit more and not to intervene. I think in Europe we sometimes have the tendency that we plan too much, want to plan the outcome of the markets too much. This might have made sense 10 to 15 years ago when there was monopolies in Europe. And I like to prefer this a little bit with growing kids. I think if they're very young, and that was in the early years of liberalization when there were only monopolies, it's logic that we had to intervene quite a lot. But now we are 15, 16, 17 later, and so the industry is really almost adult, and I think you should give, just like with kids, give them more freedom so that they can spread their wings and develop more. So I think you can trust the market really, that the market will bring a lot of value. And I think as regulators you can really be also proud of the work that you have done in the past years to get us to the point where we are now. So that basically are my main comments on this first topic, Bruno.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the ECTA now. So Elsbeth, let us get your view on that.
Thank you very much for the excellent event, well, here are my thoughts, which I hope are also food for thought for the decision makers. I would certainly agree on having ambitious goals in place, and I think there is nobody, I would say, in this room who would disagree that Europe should become a global leader in terms of networks, in terms of its economy. I think we need to make, however, a very important distinction. We want our economy and society to be globally competitive. It is not just 2 or 3 companies in Europe that we want to be globally competitive. And I think there is a huge distinction here, because a globally competitive economy and society is built on local competition, on actually a diversity of investors investing in high-speed networks, some of them focusing on urban areas, others focusing on rural areas. And it is really that dynamic which is also leading to innovation, product innovation, which is generating demand for high-speed services, which ultimately actually will boost the productivity of businesses in all sectors of the economy, and that will also get end users connected. It has nothing to do with the global market power of a handful of companies. Having a very concentrated European market will not make Europe more competitive globally. So I think, yes, we agree on having the best networks. We agree on global competitiveness, but I think we have a very different view on how to achieve it. I think the key here is really to have regulation in place which enables all players, bigger and smaller, to invest. And also, I think competition has proven to be actually the key driver of take-up. So it is really competition which is meeting explicit demand from end users. And it is competition, and it has been competition in traditional broadband, which actually discovered and boosted latent demand from end users. And that is the reason why we're discussing whether we should have 30 megabits per second, 100 megabit per second, or 1 gigabit per second targets in Europe, because it has been competition actually driving demand for those higher speeds. Are we having a competitive market, and are we actually away from monopolies today? I would argue not. Actually, it is quite the opposite, unfortunately. In traditional broadband, where we have a very solid regulatory framework in unbundling of the legacy copper network has been a real success, with over 42 million lines unbundled in Europe, which is about 30% of all lines or broadband lines. Yes, I would agree, yes, that has been a success, and there we do not have monopolies any longer. But look at the figures on NGA, on next generation broadband, which is what is really important, because that is the forward-looking aspect of what regulators will have to face, what type of challenges you will have to address. And if you look at the Digital Agenda Scoreboard, actually the Commission's data shows that in VDSL subscriptions, which is becoming the leading NGA technology in Europe today, incumbent operators have 86% of subscriptions, 86% market share. I would argue that that is not very far from a monopolistic situation, and at best, that is a duopoly in some cases. So I think that that is what really needs to be addressing, and that is really, I think, what should be the focal point of any regulatory reform, that we are not out of monopolistic situations, and we will never be. I think that is the other point that I would like to make. When it comes to fixed network duplication, certainly the last mile is an enduring bottleneck which cannot be duplicated over and over in an economically viable way. And I think that if we are talking about reform of the regulatory framework, maybe that is the key point, I think, that needs finally recognition, that that is the area where we will always need regulation, because we will always have enduring bottlenecks. I think when it comes to kind of investments and the size of operators becoming bigger has been put forward as an important factor for investments. Actually, if you look at the figures, so if you look at the investment levels, the capex levels of the biggest companies in Europe, telecoms operators in Europe, and if you also look at their profitability, you will see that there is no correlation. Size does not mean that that bigger operator will invest more, and also size does not mean that that operator will be more profitable. There is no clear correlation, no proven correlation between size and investments and size and profitability.
Can you ask a question? How do you measure size?
By number of subscribers.
So you don't look at market shares?
You can also look at market shares. I think you can look at it probably in different ways, but the data that we have seen actually seems to show that there isn't a clear pattern of correlation between size and profitability and the size and the level of investment of operators. And I think we can see some smaller operators who are investing multiple times of, I think, their revenues in terms of proportions than large operators into new networks. So I think that what is really, I think, quite important is that in a more concentrated market, there are clearly disadvantages. Disadvantages both in terms of investment levels, but also from a consumer and end user welfare perspective. One aspect is, of course, price, but there are clearly very, very important other aspects. We have seen markets with very concentrated market structures, which do not have excess regulation in place at all. And we have seen that that market, so I'm speaking of the United States, actually does not have a higher level of new investment in fiber than Europe does. They are approximately on par, but end user prices are extremely high, choice is extremely limited, and it has been a very big concern to the Federal Communications Commission. I am guessing that I'm out of time. I have a lot of other points to make, but I guess those will come out in the discussion.
Okay, thank you. So, Jacques, this is...
Thank you. So I'm Jacques Bonifay, President of Transatel, which is an MVNO in 5 different countries, including Switzerland. So I'll start to know what it means to be an MVNO. Small guys fighting the big guys. I'm also the President of a French MVNO association. France is kind of specific about MVNOs. It's an interesting case. And I'm also the president of the European Association of Full MVNO, which gather the biggest full MVNOs in Europe. The association is now 3 years old. We created these associations to be able to speak to the European institutions, and we thank the European institution which has been kind enough to accept the dialogue with us. We also create the associations to be able to discuss with a large device manufacturer, the Apple and the Samsung, which tended to ignore the fact that MVNOs were existing. So sometimes we had some problems to have our services running as with the way the device or the OS is evolving. So that's been quite useful of that. We have been working so far mainly on the roaming regulations, and I'm happy that the topic is changing a bit. It will give some change. Maybe I should emphasize why we need MVNOs, because sometimes in some countries, lots of people don't see why MVNOs are useful. First, MVNOs bring competition, of course at the consumer level, but not only, also at the enterprise level, and especially on the SMEs level. I think operators, because they are large organizations, they tend to focus on the consumer market and the large enterprise. It's difficult for them, because of their structure as an organization, to really provide good service to the SMEs. There's nothing wrong about them, it just happened to be difficult. So the SMEs tend to be under-serviced, and it's typically MVNOs targeting the SMEs can do it in a quite well way. And SMEs are still a part of the companies which are creating the most jobs in Europe. So I think and I think we can agree with this here, but I think it's important to provide them good services, and MVNO is a way to do it. When you look at competitions in one country, and let's take the example of France, where we see, with Free coming in France or H3G in other countries, we clearly see that the fourth operators have been destabilizing the market. Whether it's good or bad, that's another question. But we clearly see in the case of France that the regulators or the governments did not really control the way competition. And 2 years after Free entered the market, now the politics, which said that it was the best thing which happened to France, that the fourth mobile operator scam, they say exactly the opposite 2 years after, which is kind of sad. Now I think the MVNOs is a very smart way to bring competition on the market and to actually fine-tune the level of competition that the regulator wants. So I do encourage regulators to consider more and more MVNOs as to bring the right level of competition on the market, not only on the price aspect, whether it's B2C or B2B focused, but also on the innovation. And I would pretend that small organizations tend to be more innovative than big organizations. I tend to feel, I mean, if you look at the big innovations, which mostly come from the state, unfortunately, they tend to come from small companies, and you all know what I'm meaning. And they did not come from large MNOs, whether they were from the US or for Europe. So we do have a deficit in Europe of small innovative organizations which bring new services, whether they are OTT services or other kind of services throughout the world. So we need to put in place the system so that such organization can develop. I think MVNOs are players which can bring those services. I do regret that there is not enough innovation on the MVNO side. I think the MVNOs have been too much on the consumer and price aspect. Now that the prices are fairly low in Europe, I think we see that the new MVNOs coming into the market will be more around innovation, and that's clearly something which is interesting for the market. Now, what are the benefits and the threat of consolidation. Benefit, yes, I hope it's going to bring better network in terms of size, in terms of speed, and I think the regulators need to be careful that things happen, so maybe it has to go with some commitment. The freight is that when you go from 4 operators to 3 operators, and when you are an MVNO, and when you are supposed to bring some level of competition and some level of innovation, you might have a problem to get a deal, just the access. Because mobile operators, by nature, they don't like competition. So they don't like big competitors, they don't even like the small competitors. Even if they are very nice, speaking with a French accent, they still don't really like it. Although I make lots of effort to be nice. So sometimes they try to make everything possible not to answer, not to give a proposal. Then we see that the price is always a bit high. And I did lots of exercise of price replication. So I take one of the good offer of what of an MNO put on the market, I try to replicate it. And surprise, surprise, it's not that I got small gross margin, it's I got negative gross margin. So we could argue what is the good gross margin I should have as an MVNO to be able to exist on the market. But one thing that is sure is that with a negative gross margin, there is no way I can exist. So we all have, I mean, actually in the market, MNOs and MVNOs have some opinion of what is the right gross margin, but it's certainly not a negative gross margin. And I've got so many examples of negative gross margin that an MVNO would have by replicating the offer of an MNO on the market. So that's something where I think the regulators are not looking enough. And even if they don't have a legal tool to force an MNO to change it, there is still a big power in what we call the soft regulation. Just the fact that the competition authority have a look to that, or that the regulators have a look and ask the MNOs, how come this MVNO, with his wholesale price, when he replicates the retail offer, he has a negative gross margin? Can you explain? Is it something wrong in my computation? And surprise, surprise, when you do that, you see that the wholesale price is changing. And I do have lots of experience of these kind of things. So it works. Soft regulation works. So you don't need to have everything written by law. The remedies. I think that, of course, when there is a merger, there are remedies. Tend to be short-term remedies. It tends to be something which is really definite, say, okay, in the case of Germany, that I'm not an expert.
Yes, I'm sorry to stop you, but I think we have a session on remedies.
Okay.
So
I will come back on that, but
so we want to have something to say in the
and
last
I will come back, but
so
remedies tend to be too short-term and to be strict, but I will come back on that. So I think I made my point.
Thank you.
With my own style.
Thank you. So the last speaker for the panel will be Laszlo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would also like to thank berec organizing the stakeholder meeting and the opportunity for GSMA to express views on this very important topic. We very much interested in berec's work in inputting the upcoming framework review, which we also think that should bring more changes than maybe the previous did. In this first panel, I would like to focus on the benefits of consolidation, and maybe we can focus on the necessary changes to regulatory framework and remedy in the second one. We believe that consolidation can deliver long-term consumer gains, and we, GSMA, commissioned and published a report in December which examines the impact of mergers and their impact on consumer benefits such as prices, service quality, and coverage. And the aim of this study was to analyze the fullest possible set of data and relevant indicators to consumer outcomes over the longest time period possible. We took 10 years. So we believe that Frontier Economics conducted one of the most extensive empirical investigation of how prices differ in 3 and 4 player markets using the data from the GSMA database. And we found that there is no evidence that suggests that 4 player markets have produced lower prices than 3 player markets in Europe over the past decade. We also found that in mobile markets, investment in superior technologies are key determinant of market performance and consumer outcomes, because mobile markets follow technology cycles that last 7 to 8 years compared to other industries of 15, 20-year cycles. And these short cycles in mobile markets set to continue to when it comes to rollout of 4G or preparation of 5G technologies. And those investments by the mobile industry improve, of course, the total capacity, but also the utilization of capacity, so the volume of data that can be supported over existing spectrum or network is improved. And we found that most of the reduction in unit prices, I think it's very important to talk about unit price, not prices, when it comes to the analysis in Europe, over 2004 and 2014, is explained by the investment in new technologies, but rather than the reductions in margins that result directly from competition or productive or allocative efficiencies. But also new network cycles also unlock new cycles of innovation in services and devices along the supply chain, which drive further growth in user demand and in new services. We believe that mergers can increase incentives to invest and bring those benefits which I just described. Of course, operators are likely to benefit from the larger customer base, leading to economies of scale, widely recognized, to be significant in the mobile markets, but also would allow merging parties to combine assets which create investment opportunities which would not otherwise arise. Of course, the exact impact on consumers will depend on the nature of the merger. For example, if the result of the merger is to create a new market leader just at the point of a transition from one technology cycle to another, then that would allow the player to come earlier and much aggressively to the market, but otherwise would be the case, and of course force others to follow. And that was the case, we believe, in the UK merger between the Orange and T-Mobile, which allowed Everything Everywhere to roll out 4G earlier and more quickly than would have the case absent the merger. Of course, on the other hand, if merger instead involves two smaller players, then this may allow these players to catch up with other firms in the market. And I think we also heard examples of that today. We believe that the deployment of high-speed broadband networks providing consumers with the best outcomes, not only in terms of quality of service and coverage, but also in terms of the price trends. And we think that policymakers should look at that dynamic efficiencies and longer-term consumer gains when assessing the impact of these trends, this consolidation mergers, which of course are very prevalent in the market today. Might stop here and
thank you.
Let after the series of questions
okay, so we have 15 minutes to discuss, so there should be microphones to distribute. So what I suggest is to take 1, 2, maybe 3 reactions from the floor, and go back to the panel, and then go back to the floor. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Please, if you could, maybe you all know each other, but I don't. So, so if you could present yourself.
Yes. Thank you. I am Marc Lebourge from Orange. I think we know each other. But I have, in fact, two remarks, 2 comments. One is in the trends which exist in the European industry. One important trend which is still unfortunately true and which has not been commented is for some years, and it's a unique case in the world, the European telecom industry is experiencing decreasing overall revenues and decreasing overall profits. And we do not think this is a sound situation that may attract investment, and we think this trend needs to be reversed. And my first question is, do the people in the panel think that it's good that the revenue and the resource allocated to networks are going down for several years, and how can we change this trend? This is my first point. My second point is maybe on mergers and merger control is some form of what we could call a barrier to exit. And a barrier to exit is also, it can be quite easily shown, a barrier to entry. If you cannot exit, you hesitate to entry. So a barrier to exit is a barrier to entry. The framework is supposed to lower the barrier to entry. And so by building barrier to exit, maybe you put barrier to entry up. Thank you.
Okay, so anybody wants to react to Orange comments?
Yes. Yes, I definitely want. I think you raised two important and interesting remarks, Mark. It's indeed, if you look at the revenue trend in Europe, you see a declining trend over the past years, and despite that, I think we have kept investment levels at more or less the same level. That means that it always comes less and less profitable to invest in this telecom sector over the past years. So this is a challenge, and I think an industry which continuously face declining revenues is an industry which is dying. So I think basically we need to find a way to deal with that and to go back to growth. That's essential, and I think we need. One of the things is probably a little bit too much fragmented market. That's what I already talked about. So we should allow the market to a certain extent to repair on that perspective. And then on the second thing, on exit barriers, yes, we have, I think, in Europe the tendency to avoid failure. So we always try to keep the same number of players in the market, and we consider it as a disaster if there's a failure. I think it's in every industry. There are people sometimes exiting the market, and so we should also be flexible for that and allow people to exit the market when there is a good reason for, and to maybe merge with other players and things like that to build more scale and to be able to innovate more. Now maybe briefly on what you said, I think we basically already agree on the importance of investment. So that's already very important, and the fact that we need to be very ambitious in Europe. In terms of the remedies, I think, and the approaches and the things, I think we have some disagreements. I think the problem a little bit is if you really want to stimulate investments in Europe, you also need to give the people the opportunity to grab the benefits of investing. So if you have a too strong regulatory regime whereby you say to people, but if you invest, I will regulate you, then you people basically are discouraged to do the investments. And I think in the past, when there was only monopolies, of course you had to regulate them in order to open up the market. The situation now today, we are already 20 years down the road furthermore, and think so now the rules have to be softened a little bit in order that we can stimulate this investment and innovation rally between the players. So that's not obvious that you can use another network, but that sometimes you really need to have the courage to invest yourself. So there we need to find, I think, the right balance for the next 20 years which are in front of us.
Mark wanted to say something.
Yeah, and then you first to react, and then I will say.
Yes, thank you. So I think on the state of the industry. Certainly some operators' revenues have decreased. I think that's a fact. However, decreasing revenues have not much to do, or maybe nothing to do actually, with excess regulation. certainly not fixed access regulation. Actually, unbundling was introduced in the early 2000s, and actually that was the period when take-up was driven by unbundling and competition based on unbundling, and revenues were increasing. So in the most competition-intensive period, actually the industry performed better. I think basically on that point, I would say revenues and profits, it has to do very much with transition from a voice and very much unit-based business model to a data-centric business model, and to adapt to a reality where actually data is the most demanded and paid for product. And that transition for certainly the larger operators who have been moving relatively slow, but also for some of the altnets, has been painful and slow. Now, on the point I think that you have made, so in order to stimulate investments, I think the important thing is that we recognize where the enduring bottlenecks are and which are the parts of the network where you cannot have multiple investments. And that is what I would argue is not going to change. The last mile, whether it is made of copper or fiber, cannot be duplicated over and over and over again in a viable manner that will actually produce revenues and profits for operators. Therefore, the only way you can actually have a maximized investment is that operators are unable to invest maybe in other parts of the network. So therefore, kind of maintaining physical access, sub-loop unbundling, local loop unbundling, which enable alternative operators to invest in the duplicable parts of the network will be also very important, I think, in a forward-looking manner. And I know that you argue that access regulation removes investment incentives, but I think in terms of evidence from very regulated markets, it is just not there. If you look at the Netherlands is a very regulated market. It was the first one to actually impose fiber unbundling on a cost-oriented basis, and yet it has one of the highest levels of investment in point-to-point fiber, which happens to be the most future-proof technology. So there isn't any clear evidence. You argue that. I know that commercially that is very attractive to get out of competition and to be able to increase prices. That's commercially attractive, maybe I think almost to anyone, but that doesn't make it a fact.
Reaction from all the panel, I guess.
Yes, I think the times have changed. For a long time, it was the aim of telecom regulation to have low prices and good services. I think not that we've reached, of course, the price level can always be improved. But our problem in the moment is that in Europe, we do not have enough investment. We don't have the best networks anymore, globally seen, and so on. And the big question is, how do we get there? And I agree with the colleague from Orange that with decreasing margins and decreasing profits and constantly lowered prices, I think we will not get there. So one of the aim also of the regulatory strategy must be to get the investment going forward here. And for that you have to incentive. And for me, it's not a question whether that's the incumbent or the challenger. And I've discussed with several or quite many CEOs, be it from incumbent firms, be it from challengers, who said if it goes on like that and the margins go down and down and down, and the prices probably as well, and within the profits, we will not be able to do the necessary investment. Now, that's usually not something a regulator says, but I think we have the responsibility for a European digital market, and I understand the Commission goes in the same, or thinks slowly in the same direction, saying that we have to reconsider the whole regulatory system in the European Union, but also here in Switzerland, and not having too many hurdles and so on. And going back to our topic concerning merger consolidation of the market, only a consolidated market will have enough finances for these investments which are necessary for Europe.
That, I will give the priority to Matthias, because he didn't talk yet. So.
Yes, I think what we have seen is already that the concentration is happening, because the European Commission approved all these cases we have talked about. And I think it's since a couple of years we have seen there are some conditions, and some of our cable members take even advantage, like UPC, to be an MVNO when there is an advantage. So, but I think we have more or less a sound system. And I was a regulator for 12 years in Germany, and regulation was always designed with Mark together to be a transitional system as a bit. It's transitional, you know. I think I couldn't imagine, and that was the intention, that when market conditions change, we go on regulating forever, you know. And it's also not true that there is not a chance to go to the house and to the last mile in a competitive infrastructure competition. Especially the most successful countries in Europe, which has the highest penetration, the highest quality, it was mentioned before, which is Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, and others, they have infrastructure competition in the last mile. You know, there is a cable network, yeah, but it goes to the last mile, you know, and let's discuss about other things. But I think infrastructure competition, a lot of studies prove that, is a main driver for investment for NGAs. You know, if you have a DOCSIS 3 or 3.1 network, the incumbents are forced to invest also. You know, and I think that the infrastructure competition has, in my view, and the studies show it, more merits than opening up. You know, and most of the regulators did a completely different set for NGA than for the traditional copper legacy. So we are in a transition. We have remedies. We're talking about merger cases. So what comes up now, and in this discussion, and it's your point, do we really need something new for oligopolistic markets? I don't believe that, you know, that we have oligopolistic structures in this sector is good, you know, because I regulated four other infrastructure sectors and they are a natural monopoly. So we have an advantage that this sector is an oligopoly. That's a big success we had over the past, let's say, 15, 20 years. And so we have a sound system which is in place. If there are systems of significant market power, yes, okay, then we can act, you know. But I think there is no necessity at all to have a specific ex ante oligopoly regulation. I think it would be anyhow very difficult to do so. And a last point from my side, because I had not an intervention the first time, let's talk about regulation as barriers of entry. You know, we had a 3 criteria test when regulation started, and that there are high barriers of entry. Now we see WhatsApp, and I think all here around have WhatsApp, nearly all, 90%, you know. WhatsApp has taken away all the SMS revenues in a rush, you know. It's a better system, it's easy, it's with no cost. And some of our colleagues, when I was still a member here of this organization, we discussed about SMS pricing, yeah. And so there is no barrier of entry, and the same thing is with Netflix and these other services. So we are competing, you know. So the case is just what and how do we compete? And I think it's never intended to go on forever with the same kind of regulation. So I think the transition, which hopefully BEREC sees, is there really a need? And if there is a need to change things, I think we have to focus more on the OTT, which have a lot of bargaining power, which changed a lot more in markets than any access regulation did in the past 10 years.
As I am eager to continuously
I guess we can continue, but you wanted to just say something.
I would like to respond on my former Orange colleague on the revenue decline. I would say let's differentiate where the revenue declines come from. I can see regulation, but this is to a minor extent, I would say. Is it politics? If I'm looking at the roaming discussion, I would say this has huge impact. Is it a business model of a vertical integrated operator which maybe comes to an end? It's not the job of a regulator to secure out-of-date business models. And if it comes to competition, if the cause for the revenue decline is competition, I would say this is not negotiable. Competition secures investment. And here I'm referring to Matthias. I would say we should think about how to look at competition, how to look at market, how to define markets. As I said before, when I look into the market, I don't see mobile operators, I don't see cable operators, I see ISPs giving access to consumers to data. And that's all. And they are all competing with each other. And if we talk about infrastructure competition, for example, I would be very careful to look at purely at the incumbent's legacy network and opening it up, but look at it in a broader way. Cable competes with mobile, and cable compete with the rest, with incumbent network. So maybe we should look at the markets in a broader way.
Julian, do you have something to add? Or?
Well, just very briefly, I mean, the point, I mean, we think we are mixing a little bit discussions on access regulation and S&P type discussions with consolidation, which I think is the topic of this first panel. On consolidation, I think the statement that consolidation and changing market structure for a given regulatory environment will lead to more investments, benefits to consumer, is actually a very hard statement to show in terms of economics. It's really quite restricted the conditions under which that's true. More generally than not, that's not true. And therefore, I've also seen the GSMA study where this argument is sketched. I mean, we look forward to the full study, which will show it more fully. But I think we have to be very careful as economists to apply findings we have from different environments, and in particular the ones that Bruno mentioned, to findings that are applicable to merger control and consolidation. And I think in that environment, it's actually quite hard to find those effects. And the other point I'd like to make on ex-post evidence, I think this is very important that we know the effects of these changes in market structure. I think the best type of evidence is the type that you compare across countries with and without changes in market structure and try to compare the impact across those countries. So I think what the RTR is showing, if complemented with comparisons with other countries, and we are cooperating with the RTR to do that, to develop that framework for past mergers, I think is very insightful. I think personally we've seen in a number of cases more general price concentration studies across member states have multiple difficulties and are typically not very robust to make strong claims about the effects of concentration on prices and outcomes. Again, the GSMA has some of this in its executive summary. I look forward to the full study, but I think the better evidence is when we have natural experiments, now we have a few, and we compare outcomes in those countries with those where consolidation has not taken place.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up this session. Let me make a few summaries. So what I get is that everybody agrees that investment, quality, innovation is key. This is a time for investing, but I guess nobody agrees on how to achieve that and what is the right regulatory framework. Let me make two other comments from my experience first. I participate to a lot of conference roundtable on internet, and I'm a bit struck that when I meet with telcos, let's put it, we talk about telcos. When I meet with internet, we talk about big content and things, and we all know they are on the same big digital society network, and so there should be some time to rethink about, if you have to rethink the regulatory framework, to rethink about this regulatory framework by thinking about the relationship between the data, the content on one side, and the telco. There are a lot of tensions and bottleneck also in the content part, and that would be important to take into account. A second is a reaction from other sectors. So you seem to think that there are a lot of barriers to entry. I tend, when I look at what you say, to think that the industries are much more reactive than we think. There are much more industries in which a merger will trigger no entry for the next 20 years. And so what we see is after 3 years, 2 years, where a merger failed or passed, there are new actors that come in. The market adapt. So it's not clear to me that the market is not so, that the dynamics of the market is not bigger than in other industries. Think about electricity.
In France.
Everywhere. Especially in France, but we know why. But we need to stop here, and we'll thank everybody for the first panel, and we'll call on you in about 20 minutes? 15 minutes. We're a bit late.